Hi everyone, and welcome to The Climate of Sport with me, Claire Poole, the podcast where we explore how the world of sport can drive climate action, champion equality and shape a more sustainable future. From the boardroom to the locker room, from grassroots to global stages, the game is changing and so are we. Let's get into it. Hi everyone, welcome back to the pod. It's wonderful to be back with you. I hope you're all having a lovely week. It's been a busy one here. A few different things have been going on. One, I was down at the conference in the UK in Cornwall at the Eden project called Anthropy. The tagline for this event was Inspiring a Better Britain. Loads of different topics and people across all different sectors, from government, civil society, business, the economy, technology, young people, community, coming together about how we can inspire a better Britain. So nice to go to a conference that isn't just focused on sport, to be honest, to look outside of our bubble. And it was really interesting. I heard loads of different topics, loads of different speakers, and had lots and lots of meetings. A lot of the learnings I took, I sort of applied to sport and put that into a reel for Instagram. We'll put the link in the show notes here if you haven't heard that. Have a listen and let me know what you think. But a really, really interesting session and lots and lots to think about from that. I also had the pleasure of recording an episode of BBC Radio 4's Rare Earth, which is their leading environmental show, and that's made into a podcast as well for radio and then for pod afterwards. So again, we'll put the link in the show notes here if you haven't listened. You'll be able to access that if you're in the UK. And if you're not, hey, you can get it through a VPN. But a really interesting episode. I was delighted to join to speak alongside footballer Morten Thorsby and historian Peter Frankopan, hosted by Casa Alom and Helen Chersky. So a really, really interesting discussion about the future of sport and climate impacts thereof. So yeah, that's what's been going on here. But enough about what's been going on. Let's get into the climate hat trick for this week. 3 stories, big news stories in the world of sport, viewed through the lens of climate and sustainability. So one thing when I was looking at the news this week, and the first story is kind of not just one story, but a few stories wrapped in together under the banner of investors and broadcasters continue to pile into women's sport. Another reminder this week that women's sport is absolutely booming and the numbers continue to be impossible to ignore. So across global football, for example, or soccer, the momentum continues to build apace. Mary Fowler signed a $10 million deal Adidas, one of the biggest in women's football history. Meanwhile, the San Diego Wave inked US women's national team star Katerina Macario in a record NWSL deal. She's going to earn about $8 million over 5 seasons, plus bonuses and incentives. Last weekend, Denver's new NWSL team set the national benchmark for club soccer. They got a league attendance record of over 63,000 fans going to the game. And that also made it a record for attendance of a standalone women's soccer game in the US to date as well. So lots happening in the US around soccer football, but this goes beyond talent as well. So broadcasters and media companies are building now dedicated women's sport portfolios beyond just one-off events. This week, Sky Sports signed a multi-year deal with influencer Jake Paul's Most Valuable Promotions organisation to broadcast boxing events in the UK, including a regular all-female fight cards. Earlier this month, the PWHL, which is the Professional Women's Hockey League, chose Scripps Sports to broadcast the game on ION in a one-time deal that could potentially turn into a long-time partnership. So their president, the president of Scripps Sports, Brian Lawler, said, "Everything we believed about the interest in women's sport has proven itself out, which is why it makes sense to keep doubling down." What he was referencing was that Scripps, the organisation that owns ION, which is a network reaching 126 million US households, had previously acquired rights to the WNBA and the NWSL, and now it has added in the PWHL to its portfolio as well. This, of course, is an ongoing signal that women's sport is central to growth strategies. Women's sport, we know, has been historically undervalued compared to men's leagues, but is now seen as high growth, high potential, and recognised as an asset class for investors. A couple of days still in US sports, it was announced that the NFL is developing a new professional flag football league for both women and men. Flag football, what we would call here in the UK American football, what in the US is just called football, with a broad and influential investor pool. So that includes NFL clubs, established institutional and strategic investors, and current and former NFL players. So to reiterate, they are developing this league for both women and men in concert. Arthur Blank, who acquired the Atlanta NWSL franchise for $165 million at the end of last year, was back in the news this week after announcing their new president of soccer across the Atlanta team. So again, he was talking at the Sport Business Journal conference about the focus on finance in the growth of women's sport and looking at bottom line. So a lot of women's sports news this week around investment, around broadcast, around talent, and around reach. The continued meteoric growth of women's sport offers brands and investors the opportunity to reach new audiences, access new revenue streams, and secure high returns. But of course, this is the Climate of Sport podcast. So the reason I'm talking about it is because it benefits society and the planet as well. Research shows that women's sports fans are more likely to have a values-first mindset and prioritize brands that demonstrate integrity and social responsibility. So in the environmental space, we can see that female athletes are more likely to use their platforms to advocate for causes they care about. So as their platform grows, as investment continues, as it becomes more mainstream, so does the reach of the messaging, and that can only be a good thing for the environment and our society. As a reminder, with record-breaking viewership, expanding sponsorship investment, and this fan base driven by values, women's sports presents the chance for brands to align with purpose-driven engagement, and investors and sponsors who recognize this are not only securing financial returns, but also contributing to a more inclusive, responsible, and sustainable sports ecosystem. Story 2, what connects flooding, felons, sinkholes, and shortened distances? It's the Brazilian MotoGP. The MotoGP in Brazil returned to the Autódromo Internacional Ayrton Senna for the first time since 1989, but was overshadowed by a weekend marked by flooding, structural failure, and deteriorating race conditions, unfortunately. Heavy rain in the days leading up to the event left a section of the circuit waterlogged, with mud repeatedly washing onto the track. Whilst March does fall just in the tail end of Brazil's rainy season, a statement from the sports governing body highlighted unprecedented rainfall as a reason for these track issues. Crews struggled to manage the situation. Local authorities even deployed prison inmates to assist with clearing debris, highlighting the scale of the challenge and the resources available to put this right. The situation escalated during the competition when a sinkhole began to form along the main straight, one of the fastest section of the track, forcing a 90-minute delay to one of the sprint races. And the incident pointed to a deeper structural issue beneath the track surface, likely worsened by water infiltration. So basically there was a defunct sewer system underneath the track, and that led to a weak point that was probably worsened by the incredibly heavy rainfall and flooding that had taken place. Conditions continue to deteriorate, with visible damage to the asphalt appearing along the racing line, and riders reported dangerously low grip levels, and loose fragments of the track surface were being thrown up. Riders actually came into the post-race debriefs with contusions and sores from being hit by broken asphalt pieces being fired at them from the riders in front. Among those affected was reigning world champion Marc Marquez, who lost a podium position after encountering a crumbling section of track in the closing laps. Safety concerns forced organisers to take emergency measures, and the race was actually revised. So what was supposed to be a 31-lap race was reduced to 23 to reduce the risk to riders. So again, it's the climate of sport. What are we talking about here? Heavy rain is not unusual for this time of year. Of course, it's in the rainy season in Brazil. It's a reminder that unprecedented levels of rain or unprecedented climate impacts, even within the expected weather conditions, can overwhelm infrastructure. In this case, probably short, intense rainfall bursts that were still in the rainy season, but unexpected, overwhelmed drainage, which then cascaded into risks such as from flooding to subsurface failure to surface collapse. MotoGP is expanding into new and returning venues worldwide, So the rainfall in Guyana may serve as a warning. It's not just about weather extremes, but whether the infrastructure is prepared to handle them. And what I wanted to highlight here is perhaps this isn't a direct climate impact in terms of being attributed to climate change directly, because it was the rainy season in Brazil, so we could expect rain to fall, nothing unusual about that. But the fact the governing body pointed to unprecedented levels of rain, it shows that even when the climate predictably does what you expect it to, a combination of worsening levels is enough to expose weaknesses really quickly and really publicly. So a reminder that these are areas, even when the weather is what we expect, it can still be extreme and therefore cause impacts. Story 3, climate crashes the race. Protesters halt pro cycling. So the organisers of the 2026 Ronde van Brugge have launched legal action against a climate protester who disrupted the men's race. The activist appeared in the course around 30 kilometres from the finish line, wearing a helmet and t-shirt reading, "Kids dying by the climate crisis in 3, 2, 1. Breaking free from the crowd, he sat on the road as the densely packed peloton approached. Outrider motorbikes acted quickly, forcing the Belgian activist, whose name is Wout de Mouton, off the course, but the sudden braking caused a pile-up and it took down last year's winner, Juan Sebastian Molano. This ended the UAE Team Emirates XRG's riders' race and caused him injury as well. Mouton has a history of high-profile activism, including a short prison term for gluing his head to Vermeer girl with a pearl earring, while another protester poured tomato passata over him. This was the first incident of its kind this season, but we know, and organisers, teams, riders and fans know, it probably won't be the last. In 2025, all 3 men's Grand Tours faced a disruption from on-course demonstrations. Protesters have been a regular occurrence in pro cycling. Climate protesters accounted for a number of notable disruptions to races. In 2022, at the Tour de France, climate activists had to be dragged off the course by policemen and even race officials, and protesters glued themselves to the road at the 2023 UCI Road World Championships. Activism at elite sports reflects a broader trend that people within our society increasingly expect high-profile institutions like sports organisations to take climate action seriously. Professional sport draws massive global audiences, so that is why it is targeted when activists choose elite areas, elite platforms, elite events to protest. It reflects how central climate concerns have become in our public discourse. So again, this story, the reason for its inclusion this week is whether through protest or extreme weather, sport is continually being forced to reckon with climate disruption, impacting safety, scheduling, infrastructure, and even the fan experience. Pro Cycling Europe frequently has to deal with extreme weather and climate impacts. So in the past, we've seen extreme heat, landslides, flooding, high-speed wind. But this is an example that even when the weather plays ball, even when you don't have an extreme weather event to deal with and react to, the impacts of the climate crisis are still showing up, in this case through protesters, and causing disruption. This, to me, proves that sport can never be separated from the world it plays in. Thank you for joining us. We're going on now. You're going to hear from me again. Nyla and I caught up this week where she told me the themes that she thinks have come through during our leadership interviews, and I react to what that is. So over to me, I guess. So over the last few months, we've brought together some incredible and influential voices who are using their role or platform within sport to drive really positive change. And we asked them all to join us under the banner of leadership, which was the series that we've just completed on the climate of sport. So what we wanted to really dig into is what it really takes in terms of being a leader in this area, what's changing, where the future's heading, sharing not just successes, although we love to hear it, but the challenges, trade-offs, and the realities of leading in a changing world. This episode is a distillation of those conversations. We want to highlight the sharpest insights, the honest moments, and the ideas that challenge how sport is operating today as we move to taking more action on climate and building in sustainability to sports organisations. When it comes to sport and sustainability or climate risk, it's not obviously just about performance or having all the answers. It's about responsibility, it's about resilience, it's about making better decisions and understanding the impact sport can have far beyond the game as well. So, of course, we recommend you go back and listen to all those episodes in full if you haven't yet. But if you haven't had time to listen to them all, or even if you have listened to them, but you want to hear our thoughts on the threads that connect all of the insights from these leaders, this roundup is going to be for you. Also, just a quick note, shameless plug, we are trying to grow the podcast. So we are doing a weekly format now, and we're trying to make it as useful and helpful for you as possible. So if you can share this episode with colleagues or friends you think will like it, go into your partner's phone, follow it there. They probably won't even notice. It really helps. And obviously, we're asking because it's really, really incredible to build the podcast out, but also the more people who listen and the higher up the rankings it goes, then obviously we're bringing sport in as a way to cut through to people who otherwise don't really engage on the climate crisis. So we hope it will help you as well. So shameless plug over. Nyla, let's get on with it. This is going to be interesting. So you are going to tell me the threads that you found throughout all of the recordings, and I'm going to react. So fingers crossed, I've had a coffee. Let's see. Go on.
Yeah, I think sort of those common themes and connecting those dots really show a bigger story about leadership, especially in climate and sport. So our themes today, continuous improvement, starting where you are, building foundations and embedding sustainability as early as you can, going beyond silos and collaborating, frameworks to unlock scale and investment, maximizing impact by aligning purpose with profit and resources, data as a foundation for credibility and action, and finally, sport as a system-level influencer. All of our guests spoke about continuous improvement, about leadership not being the final destination, but leadership emerging as relentless commitment to learning, adapting to evolving context situations, learning from the various challenges and obstacles that arose. We heard from Julia, we heard from Denise on these few things, but I just wanted to know kind of what your thoughts were on continuous improvement in terms of leadership and climate.
Nice. Okay, so continuous improvement is not a massive surprise to me. I think we're really fortunate in our industry that there aren't loads of really big egos in the world of sustainability in sport. I think everyone, certainly the leaders that we had on the podcast in our community more broadly, come from a real place of humility and that endeavoring to improve all the time. I think it's a really key tenet of the industry that attracts people. So that theme isn't a massive surprise to me. I think what's interesting is the continuous improvement with leadership shows that these people are continuing to hold themselves to account. So even though some, like Julia in the work at Formula E, is so far ahead, they were on the leadership episode talking about now being B Corp certified, continuing to strive, even though they have most certifications and accreditations anyway.
Always the way we look at it is basically what is it that it will bring to us and help us improve. And if all goes well, we've got the reward of the certification.
So I think that is indicative of the fact that even those who ostensibly from the outside are really, really leading are still trying to push further. So I think that's incredible leadership. And also, I think it maybe is an insight that we have to continuously improve. We can't stand still because the landscape that we're working in is continuing to evolve. So not just in terms of maturity as things move forward, but also the way, for example, we're having to change the language of the way we speak.
We need to talk the language that our audiences talk. And language has always evolved. The language we use and how we influence people has continued to change. And we need to recognise that language continues to evolve. And that's how culture changes.
Or we're having to change the storytelling. We're having to find different value in the work that we do. We're having to talk about it differently. We're trying to present it differently. So, and that I think if you're not continuously improving, you're really going to get caught out in these areas.
Definitely. And we're all in this industry working towards a common goal. What are your thoughts on competing with yourself in your own organization rather seeing it as a competition against other people and other organizations?
Oh, I like this. I can imagine we're going to hear quotes from like Julia and Taka around this. So Julia, I know, mentioned something along those lines.
And I think that's what I mean by leadership. It's really about continually pushing yourself, going above and beyond. And the competition is not so much with the others, it's with yourself.
I think one, the competition with yourself is a real parallel with athletes, isn't it? Like, yes, of course, you're competing against others to take medals, but also they have the mindset of this continuous improvement of the only competition you've got is like with your previous self because you're trying to improve all the time. I know, say with Taka, he was talking about taking sport positive leagues over to Japan. And we talk more broadly about the fact that sport positive leagues, although there's a ranking element and it's friendly competition, really it's about leveling up and about, if we take that mode of trying to compete with yourself to do better, that helps everyone.
Their mindset is now more strategic compared to before we had this conversation around SPL.
As everyone continues to improve or compete with themselves to improve, then that benefits everyone. Yeah, great to hear. Very interesting.
Feeding into that continuous improvement, another big theme, starting where you are, building foundations and embedding sustainability into your organization, league, federation, whatever it may be, as early as possible. We saw this with your chat with Hannah Buckley from the WSL.
Super exciting time for us. And over the next 5 to 10 years, that transformational change, we needed to make sure we've got really good foundations to set them up for success.
As well as Donna Fraser.
Have a plan. It's got to have a plan, that clear vision. Where do we want to be? And then obviously you have that discussion as to what you need to do to get to that end result. You have to involve people and really scale back and understand what the problem is before you move forward.
And Haley Ladd.
It's about doing it at the heart of the program. I think when you've got clubs like London City Lionesses building new stadiums and building new training grounds, you can really get to the heart of the issue and really implement those important strategies from the get-go.
So tell me a little bit more about those conversations and what you took away from them.
So the theme is like starting where you are. That in some ways feels wildly basic, doesn't it? How can you start anywhere apart from where you are? But actually that is an insight of the thread that brings together leaders of building those foundations and embedding sustainability as early as you possibly can, because you can start and just sort of do it something small and that's fine, the low hanging fruit, but also what we've seen with these leaders in different ways. So Taka in Japan with sport positive leagues, or Sport England in showing how they are connecting their funding to their systems partners having climate action plans, or Donna in her work with the Professional Cricketers Association of them trying to, even though they're quite early on in the journey, trying to do it in a structured way. All of that begins by taking a first step in action, but also embedding sustainability into culture as quickly as possible rather than waiting for perfection. Start where you are, build that foundation and embed it across the organization as quickly as possible. I think the leadership in this area is iterative as well. What's leadership in one moment can continue to evolve, as we've mentioned, but that early integration, being patient, leaving your ego at the door, problem solving, that all goes in line with the way people lead in this area.
That's more, I guess, the internal view from it. We learned a lot about the internal operations at the different organizations, but also what came up was sort of the external side. So in terms of collaborations and partnership.
So is this our next theme? Collaboration.
It's collaboration.
Nice.
You'll get more into it, but obviously we've heard from Haley Ladd. We're now seeing football clubs, the men's and women's sides, becoming one club together.
The way in which the women's game is growing at the moment in this country, you do have a lot of one club ideologies where you have obviously the men's and women's side. So I think that also gives us a really unique opportunity to collaborate.
And Denise Ludlam, talking about using the sphere of influence and, collaborating to really build on shared thinking and resources.
Leaders collaborate, and we talk about collaboration loads and loads and loads. But often when I'm chatting to people, they say to me, we're so busy. I'm literally doing the job of 3 people over here. When we talk about going beyond our own area and collaborating, it can feel like a lot of work, but actually, as you've mentioned, this is what we're hearing from those who are leading in this area, because those who can maybe take a little bit of time to get outside of their own worldview and their own focus and their own niche, whether it's a department inside an organization or their own sport in their own country. That wider viewpoint really helps affect new ideas. And I think it was Hannah who mentioned their ISWAG group.
Is we've created an internal sustainability action group called ISWAG. I won't take credit for that, by the way. That's the content people. Yeah, a bit swaggy.
Love that.
But tactically for us, what was a recognition is that every department, whether you're in comms, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in commercial, whether you're in football operations,
it doesn't have to be really hard work. It can be getting lunch with colleagues in different departments. So it's not about trying to make things more difficult, but we need that person to have the responsibility for sustainability in an organization. But ultimately, it's everyone's job.
So we need to provide all the resources that are necessary for people to do that within their day job. And it should be part of everybody's day job.
It's not just one department. And how can you expect that one person to know how sustainability manifests across a whole organization? That's a really big ask. So take what you need to from going beyond silos and collaboration. For some people, that will literally be chatting to people they've never met inside their organization just to hear how their job works and maybe how sustainability might work for them. But I think the big thing for me when it comes to collaboration as an idea in leadership, it doesn't have to be complex. Impact is amplified when leaders work across teams, across sectors, across organizations. We all know knowledge sharing is absolutely critical. We all learn from each other. And if we can foster those approaches, it's really, really going to help. So
2 things actually stuck out to me there. Talking about making things less complex. So keeping things simple and visual and measurable so everyone can get behind it. Scaling within the organization. So going outside of your department. So the next thing that came up was frameworks unlocking scale and investment. That was another clear theme that came through. So just connect the dots for us on that one.
This is interesting. Now I'm racking my brains, but I think there's 2 different ways that frameworks came through from the interviews that we did. One, joining external frameworks, which is brilliant. That can really help provide a literal framework of action so that you've got pillars to get behind and it helps you move forward more quickly. So Taka, for example, joining Sport Positive League, spoke about how his initial interest in what we were doing was because they were starting really from scratch, and it just provided them the categories that they needed to look at and the point scoring system where they could be like, this is ambitious and this is quite entry level.
With this framework, people can visualize what we are doing.
They're surely going to evolve past that at some point, but it's that making things easy or taking advantage of things that already exist, and that leadership to acknowledge that you don't have to start from scratch every time.
I think my sense is that all the solutions that we need to solve sustainability are already out there being practiced by someone. We just need to find out who that is and copy them.
I think some of the maybe people we spoke about and interviewed were thinking about frameworks externally. We have people on there who are signatories of UN Sports for Climate Action frameworks, but probably as well, it's about having an internal framework of action, almost in the way that it just keeps things logical. So you're not doing things in an ad hoc way. Things don't start and then drop off when a small campaign is finished or someone leaves the organization. So there's 2 different elements of framework. And the way I guess it links to investment is evidence. If you've got that framework, you work in a robust, methodical way, you're creating essentially a bank of evidence and data that provides credibility. That credibility can then inform strategy, and that turns more abstract sustainability goals into operational and business decisions. And that's really important for us because we need to ensure that people aren't viewing sustainability as a nice to have, we have to continue to reinforce that this information forming operational and business decisions, and the investment angle is if you're asking for resource or funding internally, or if you're selling your work to brands or sponsors externally, you need something that's compelling. You need to show it filters across your whole organization. It represents your organization. It's in your DNA, rather than just pointing to, well, we did a couple of social media posts once. That isn't going to cut it if you are trying to leverage robust internal or external frameworks for that move to investment, because it is a really important part of this for us.
Nice. So let's talk about aligning purpose with profit to maximize impact.
I remember Julia saying something about this, just about bringing economic, social, environment together, ESG.
Because our mission is really to inspire people living a more sustainable lifestyle.
Through the lens of leadership, we're nothing if not pragmatic. We need this work to happen. It's critical. More events are becoming seriously impacted by climate change. It's only going to get worse. But equally, the commercials have to stack up. So aligning purpose with profit is really, really important. And that shows true leadership, because you're thinking through the lens of the business of sport. Though nothing can be pitched as a nice to have. We have to think of how our work is making money, saving money, supporting wider value. So if you're thinking through that lens, then that is kind of leadership thinking that we heard about. And then I think the people we heard from across the series are trying to maximize impact by using resources strategically, ensuring that sustainability, inclusion, or social initiatives are obviously really environmentally and socially meaningful, but also economically viable as well. So that leadership in those different ways, I think, can help also make sure that these goals are credible and scalable as well. And I think that's the difference probably between people who are doing really important work and then those who are taking it through the leadership lens.
One thing that really resonated with me, and I'm sure with many other listeners, was that making decisions using evidence-based data often makes sustainability tangible. It helps guide strategy, and it helps drive action and really land with fans, with colleagues, whoever it may be involved. Did anything stick with you during your conversations that would tie into, using data as a foundation for credibility and action?
Yeah. So this is the cornerstone of our work, basically. I think actually I've been thinking about this a lot because of different things I'm involved with about data from a comms perspective. And sidebar, I honestly think we probably talk too much about data when we tell stories about sustainability in sport. And I think we need to be careful about that. That's a separate issue. But data is obviously the cornerstone of what we're doing. If you're selling a concept internally or externally, as we mentioned, you need that data. If you're making changes that impact your stakeholders, you want the data to say why or why you're making decisions. And those evidence-based decisions are really important. And that obviously is a key part of leadership. But also the stories we tell can't just be about data. We have to tell more human stories. So I think there's absolutely in terms of leadership, but also with a little caveat, I think, about how we need to think about things more broadly.
Yeah, let's zoom out for a moment. So it's no secret that sport is very influential in terms of shifting mindsets of people, shifting behaviors, even affecting policy in society. So it's pretty much safe to say that sport is a system level influencer. How do you think that kind of ties all of these themes together?
When you say that, is this the last theme?
It is the last theme.
I was going to say, this is the big finish.
The big finish.
But okay, so sport, you said sport is a systems level influencer.
Yes.
I think there's so much rich content and so many great insights that we're talking from sport organizations, athletes, leagues, governing bodies, all different organizations around this. And these themes obviously came through that you've identified. I think this is a reminder. When I was recording the interviews, I did think a few times, probably in a slightly different way, but that sport leadership is exciting to people and that unlocks a massive opportunity for us. So just more broadly, we get very focused in what we're doing and we forget that people actually are very excited about sport. This influence that we have, I think we can't forget about that. I think it's great to step back and remember that actually when you do something on sustainability inside a sport organization, people will find it much more interesting and exciting than when exactly the same thing happens inside some other boring company that nobody knows about. So good for us all to remember, I think, that we have this power to not just to change ourselves, but also we cannot forget about this massive influence we have across society and make sure we're using the leadership to unlock that.
So our themes today were continuous improvement, starting where you are, building foundations and embedding sustainability as early as you can, going beyond silos and collaborating, frameworks to unlock scale and investment, maximizing impact by aligning purpose with profit and resources, data as a foundation for credibility and action, and finally, sport as a system-level influencer. It has been a pleasure to it's been a rich episode, I think. We've went a little bit deeper into the leadership series.
It's time for the quickfire round.
Which of the themes do you think leaders in sports struggle with most right now?
This is a hard one because the quick fire is I give one answer and I hold all of our guests to that. And now I'm going to break my own rules. But I think probably the most difficult one is remembering that we are a system levels influencer. I think every sport organization, even if they're not leading, they are doing all those other things, but they maybe forget about the influence that they hold.
Now, this one, you're going to have to put your thinking cap on.
Okay.
Was there a moment or an idea or concept from any of the conversations that shifted your own thinking?
One of the things that immediately pops into my head is that when we were chatting to Julia Pally about Formula E and why they became B Corps certified, she mentioned the fact that they work with a number of other standards and certifications and frameworks, which are brilliant. And, she couldn't speak highly enough of them. But the fact that B Corps interested them because of their marketing and the fact that that is a sort of brand that is more well known by the general public and it helps sort of connects people with sustainable lifestyles. And it's more, let's say, business to customer rather than business to business. And I think that was a really helpful reminder for me. And I think hopefully for everyone as well, that we can do both. You can connect with frameworks that work for you behind the scenes, but also we can't lose sight of the fact that in line with sport being a systems level influencer, we need to connect with fans and with people in the general public, not just be doing great work and talking amongst ourselves about it. So that it wasn't necessarily a learning. It was just a reminder that the way Julia said it of the way the marketing for that is good is I think the way we need to be thinking more about the work that we do now.
What's one practical step someone listening right now could take to apply some of these ideas or themes?
Everyone's at a different stage. I think that the idea of starting where you are is a really important one because some people have been at this for a lot longer and you're going to struggle to compare yourself and move forward. So it's about, to me, the best advice is work out where you are now, work out what you're already doing, work about how you can improve, understand who your fans or your participants are and what they care about. Because if you can map both your operational work around reducing impact, but really, really importantly, make sure you're talking about that work to your fans around topics they care about. That's a really good place to start this work.
And finally, last one, can you give us any exciting hints about what's coming next for the Climate of Sport podcast?
Well, I love questions that are also promotional. Of course. Yes. So this is obviously the roundup episode of this series. We are not going anywhere. The pod is going to continue to be weekly. So we're going to drop our climate hat trick every week, which is me talking about news stories of the week through the lens of climate and sustainability. We will include interviews in there as well, now and again. So we are going to hear from experts and leaders sort of outside of just listening to me. But we can also trail a special Earth Day episode on April 22nd, which I think our audience are very much going to enjoy. I'm not going to say what it's about yet, but basically there will be a special episode on Earth Day. So make sure you're following the pod and sharing it to get it as soon as it lands. That is a wrap on this episode of The Climate of Sport. If this got you thinking, send it to the group chat, send it to your team or someone who cares about the future of the game. Follow, subscribe, and join us next time because the biggest wins aren't just on the scoreboard, they're out there for the planet too. See you on the next one.